In 2003, Iranian theater director Pari Saberi adapted the Siavash story, one of the most famous Persian mythical stories. It was one of the many adaptations of this story which has its roots in an ancient time. The most notable version is the one written 1,000 years ago by the Iranian poet Ferdowsi. Pari Saberi was born in 1932 in Kerman. When she was a teenager, she moved to France where she completed a university degree in drama. In 1954, Saberi was awarded the Best University Student Film of the Year in France. A year later, she began her career in theater until 1964, when she returned to Iran and founded Pazargat Theater Group with director Hamid Samandarian. Within the last 3 decades, she has written and directed 6 play adaptations based on the Iranian national epic Shahnameh. But how did she begin adapting this epic? Saberi's professional involvement with theater as a director can be divided into 2 periods, before and after the 1979 Islamic Revolution. She started working on the world's masterpieces of dramatic literature in the pre-revolutionary era. Saberi states that these translations improved her playwriting skills. After the Islamic Revolution, Iranian theater experienced a hiatus for some years. During that time, Saberi developed her own idea of theater. Quote, "I found a wonderful dramatic potential in Persian poetry. For me, Persian poetry is a great weapon of expression. Every nation has its own means of expression. The French are successful at novels, Germans are better at philosophy, and Iranians are the greatest at poetry." End quote. In 1991, Saberi first adapted the play Man be Bagh Irfan about the life and poems of Sohrab Sepehri, the Iranian poet and painter. Since then, all of her works have been based on Persian poetry. 5 poets have been especially important to Saberi: Ferdowsi, Khayyam, Sa'di, Hafiz, and Rumi. She claims that, quote, "These Iranian figures talk about important issues. We need to collect them together as we collect ceramics because that collection would show our national identity." End quote. Iranians are enchanted by the genius of these canonical poets who are always present for them. Their presence can be traced in every Iranian's life and spirit. Spirituality is still an inseparable part of Iranian culture. People meet their spiritual needs via poetry. Iranian public intellectual Dariush Ashuri declares that following the traditions of the ancient defines Iranian values and uniqueness, and breaking the traditions and old habits is considered a huge violation against the society's values. End quote. In such a view, time brings more rather than less value to the poets of the past. Saberi shares this point of view. Quote, "Ferdowsi, Sa'di, Hafiz, Rumi, and our other philosophers and mystics might be dead, but they guarantee our survival." End quote. Saberi claims that Shahnameh, in comparison to other classical Persian works, has more potential for transformation into drama. Therefore, most of her adaptations draw on Shahnameh. She believes Ferdowsi's verse provides suitable material to create national operas. Quote, "For 15 years, I have been trying to develop an Iranian epic opera because works such as Shahnameh have the potential to be the basis of a national theater based on our native language." End quote. She borrows ideas from Taziyeh, an Iranian performance tradition, to develop her own craft. Quote, "Taziyeh is a religious opera which utilizes all operatic elements such as music, movement, and even bringing animals on a stage." End quote. Hence, all her works are full of music, dance, and spectacular scene designs, all bound together with poetic language. Saberi uses a similar approach in adapting plays. Before analyzing Mourning for Siavash, I would like to turn to Rostam and Esfandiar and Rainbird in order to make some observations about Saberi's style. Rostam and Esfandiar draws on the Shahnameh story with the same title. It tells of a king named Goshtasp who promises his son Esfandiar that if The prince defeats the Turanians, the enemies of the Iranians. He will become the king of Iran. Although Esfandiar defeats them, the king asks him to then arrest Rostam, the greatest Iranian warrior. Rostam, however, kills Esfandiar. Saberi's adaptation shares the plot of the Shahnameh version. Her adaptation differs from Shahnameh in two significant ways. Firstly, Saberi shortens the length of the story, and secondly, she includes some poems written by poets other than Ferdowsi. For example, she adds 4 lines of Rubaiyat of Khayyam to the beginning as well as the end of the play. Likewise, after Goshtasp and Astronomer's conversation, she inserts some lines from Hafiz. In some cases, borrowing these additional poems changes the rhythm of the text. Saberi also uses some prose from other writers. For example, one of Esfandiar's dialogues is direct quotation of محمد دبیرسیاقی's برگردان روایتگونه شاهنامه فردوسی به نثر. On the first page of the book, she declares that, apart from Shahnameh, she has used the analysis and words of researchers such as Muhammad Ali Mowahhed, Abbas Attari Kermani, Mustafa Azmayesh, Muhammad Dabir-Siaghi, Mustafa Jayhuni, Mustafa Soleimani, and Julius Van Mohel. The common practice expects footnotes and references, but neither these references nor the poets Khayyam, Rumi, and Hafiz appear as footnotes in the play. This could be considered plagiarism. This issue becomes more complicated in Rainbird, a work Saberi adapted from 2 stories written by Ferdowsi, Jamshid and Zahak. In Rainbird, Saberi includes poems by 17 Iranian poets as well as Hamlet's famous To Be or Not to Be. Saberi, nevertheless, doesn't credit any of these poets or sources in her footnotes. The play borrows only around 100 lines from Nima, while it uses more than 200 lines of Ferdowsi. Moreover, given that Nima never wrote a poem about Jamshid or Zahak, the plot closely resembles that of Shahnameh. The quotation from other poets, Ahmad Shamlu, Nader Naderpur, Rumi, Aref Khazvini, Furugh Farrokhzad, and others, influence the adaptation's texture rather than its storyline. Saberi defends mixing classical and modern poems together. Quote, "The difference between the classical and new poems will not confuse the audience. I think they would enjoy this mixture. In some parts of the play, we literally mix the poems of Ferdowsi and Nima," end quote. Like in Rostam and Esfandiar, the different rhythms of the poems create staging problems. Mourning for Siavash is another adaptation of Shahnameh. The story tells of a handsome and desirable prince, Siavash, who is destined to come to a bad end. Sudabe, his stepmother, falls in love with him. Because Siavash refuses to betray his father, the queen accuses him of rape. Siavash proves his innocence and king decides to punish his wife, but the prince asks him not to, and then goes into a self-imposed exile in Turan, the land of the enemy. They behead him, and a plant called Siavoshan grows from his split blood. In revenge for the queen's role in Siavash's exile, Sudabe gets killed. Like Saberi's other adaptations, Mourning for Siavash remains faithful to the source text. Quote, "I have never seen a text as dramatic as Shahnameh. I am surprised that he never wrote a play," end quote. She doesn't even change Ferdowsi's language and considers the writing of dialogue to be an outmoded dramatic technique and claims that we do not need to perform the world's dramatic masterpieces anymore. Saberi quotes Ferdowsi's verses word for word, and neither alters the language nor the story's narrative context. In most parts of the play, however, Saberi shares Ferdowsi's verse among her characters. In the past, This method was used by some other playwrights such as Kermanizadeh Iranshah, Kazemzadeh Iranshah, and Mahin Tajaddud. Theater critic Abdulreza Faridzadeh states that Mourning for Siavash, quote, is a shallow representation of the Siavash story with no creativity or study of the untold sociological and psychological aspects of the original source text. The play neither moves from its mythic time to current or future time, nor reviews the meaning of the original text. End quote. The character of Ravi speaks in prose, his words drawn from another book by mythologist Shahrukh Meskoob. Even the title of the play is borrowed from Meskoob's book, Suge Siavash, or, as we say in English, Mourning for Siavash. Saberi, moreover, never clarifies that she has added some Rumi's words to her play, pages 8, 35, 36, 42, 82, and 83. She focuses on wisdom more than other themes. In this, scholar Abdul Hossein Zarikub inspires her, quote, wisdom is the eye of the spirit. An eyeless spirit will not gain the essential perfection it needs in order to experience afterlife and eternity, end quote. She uses the word wisdom and its derivatives 14 times in her 79-page play. In order to clarify her approach, Saberi asks the question, quote, has the meaning of these poems and thoughts of these poets been explained properly for Iranian people? End quote. In fact, she adapts these works to help Iranian people stay connected with the past, as she describes. Saberi claims that the artist's task is to reintroduce culture to people, but young people that she would like to pull towards the classical works, according to my personal observation, were not interested in Mourning for Siavash. Generally, academics, critics, and committed theater audiences consider her works to be shallow and boring. Most of Saberi's audiences come from non-intellectual backgrounds and is largely made up of people who are not regular theater goers. But they did not respond positively to the performance, and consequently it did not sell well. The rhythm of Ferdowsi's verse led the director to focus on music and dance. The materials used for scene designing were very expensive. The state sponsorship neither resulted in censoring her work in any way nor limited financial support to her. Saberi's version of the Siavash story doesn't offer any form of creativity. Rather, it only replicates Ferdowsi's storyline through a new mode of engagement, theater. Her adaptation, if we can ever define it as an adaptation, doesn't give an afterlife to its source. It has ended in a form of collage rather than adaptation, in which lines of the original source text are mixed with words of other poets and scholars. She, however, doesn't refer to any of her additional resources. One might consider her works a form of plagiarism, but this perspective doesn't take into account cultural differences in how the work is received. Although Saberi doesn't cite Khayyam, Rumi, and Hafiz, most Iranians are familiar with these poets, and none would accuse Saberi of stealing their words. Saberi doesn't see herself in this way either, but rather as a reteller of what almost everyone knows. In short, the audience doesn't need to be notified of the poet's names. However, as not everyone would be familiar with the names or work of the researchers, it is unfortunate that Saberi didn't mention them in her footnotes either. Thanks for your time.